Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I have for you Ickabog 45, 46, and 47. So I already took the cover off. Okay, let's get started. Chapter 45, Bert and Jeroboam. At first, Bert didn't realize that the whole cornucopia had been warned by Lord Spittleworth to watch out for him. Following the guard's advice at the city gates, he kept to the country lanes and back roads. He'd never been as far north as Jeroboam, but by roughly following the course of the river Fluma, he knew he must be traveling in the right direction. Hair matted and shoes clogged with mud, he walked across the plowed fields and slept in ditches. Not until he sneaked into Kurtzburg on the third night to try to find something to eat did he come face to face for the first time with a picture of himself on the wanted poster taped up in a cheesemonger's window. Luckily, the drawing of a neat, smiling young man looked nothing like the reflection of the grubby tramp he saw staring out of the dark glass beside it. Nevertheless, it was a shock to see that there was a reward of 100 ducats on his head, dead or alive. Bert hurried on though the dark streets, passing skinny docks and boarded up windows. Once or twice he came across other grubby, ragged people who were also foraging in bins. At least he managed to retrieve a lump of hard and slightly moldy cheese before anyone else could grab it. After taking a drink of rainwater from the barrel behind a disused dairy, he hurried back out of the Kurtzburg and returned to the country roads. Poor Bert. All the time he walked, Bert's thoughts kept scurrying back to his mother. They won't kill her, he told himself over and over again. They'll never kill her. She's the king's favorite servant. They wouldn't dare. He had to block the possibility of his mother's death from his mind because he thought she'd gone. If he thought she'd gone, he knew that he might not have the strength to get up out of the next ditch he slept in. Bert's feet soon blistered because of his walking miles out of his way to avoid meeting other people. The next night, he stole a last few rotting apples from the orchard, and the night after that, he took a carcass of a chicken from somebody's dustbin and gnawed off the last scraps of meat. By the time he saw the dark gray outline of Jeroboam on his horizon, he had to steal a length of twine from the blacksmith yard to use as a belt because he'd lost so much weight that his trousers were falling down. All through his journey, Bert told himself that he could only find Cousin Harold. Everything would be all right. He laid down his troubles at his feet of a grown-up, and Harold would sort everything out. Bert lurked outside the city walls until it was growing dark, then limped into a wine-making city, his blisters now hurting terribly, and headed for Harold's tavern. There were no lights in the windows, and when Bert drew near, he saw why. The doors and windows had all been boarded up. The tavern had gone out of business, and Harold and his family seemed to have left. "Please," the desperate Bert asked a passing woman, "can you tell me where Harold's gone?" "Harold, who used to own this tavern?" "Harold," said the woman. "Oh, he went south a week ago. He's got relatives down in Choseville. He's hoping to get a job with the king." Stunned, Bert watched the woman walk away into the night, and chilly wind blew around him, and out of the corner of his eye he saw one of his own wanted posters fluttering on a nearby lantern post. Exhausted and with no idea what to do next, he imagined sitting down on this cold doorstep and simply waiting for the soldiers to find him. It was then he felt the pointy of his sword at his back, and a voice in his ear said, "Got ya." Chapter 46, The Tale of Roderick Roach. You might think Bert would be terrified at the sound of these words, but believe it or not, the voice filled him with relief. He'd recognize it, you see, so instead of putting up his hands or pleading for his life, he turned around and found himself looking at Roderick Roach. "What are you smiling about?" growled Roderick, staring into Bert's filthy face. "I know you're not going to stab me, Rhodey," said Bert quietly, even though Roderick was the one holding the sword. Bert could tell the other boy was far more scared than he was. The shivering Roderick was wearing a coat over his pajamas, and his feet were wrapped in bloody stained rags. "Have you walked all the way from Choseville like that?" asked Bert. "That's none of your business," spat Roderick, trying to look fierce, though his teeth were chattering. "I'm taking you in. Be measured, you traitor." "No, you're not. No, you aren't," said Bert, and he pulled the sword out of Roderick's hand. At that, Roderick burst into tears. "Come on," said Bert kindly, and he put his arms around Roderick's shoulders and led him off down a side alley, away from the fluttering wanted posters. "Get off," sobbed Roderick, shrugging away Bert's arms. "Get off me. It's all your fault." "What's my fault?" asked Bert, as the two boys came to a halt beside some bins full of empty wine bottles. "You ran away from my father," said Roderick, wiping his eyes on his sleeve. "Well, of course I did," said Bert reasonably. "He wanted to kill me." "But now he's been killed," sobbed Roderick. "Major Roach is dead," said Bert, taken aback. "How?" Spittleworth sobbed Roderick. "He came to our house with soldiers when nobody could find you. He was so angry Father hadn't caught you. He grabbed the soldier's gun and Roderick sat down on the dustbin and wept. A cold wind blew down the alleyway. This, Bert thought, showed just how dangerous Spittleworth was. If he could shoot dead his faithful head of the royal guard, nobody was safe. "How did you know I'd come to Jeroboam?" Bert asked. "Ch.45 from the palace told me. I gave him 5 ducats. He remembered your mother talking about your cousin owning a tavern. How many people do you think Ch.45 told?" said Bert. Now worried. "Plenty, probably," said Roderick, mopping his face with his pajama sleeve. "He'll sell anyone's information for gold." "That's rich coming from you," said Bert, getting angry. "You were about to sell me for 100 ducats. "I didn't want the gold," said Roderick. "It was for my mother and brothers. I thought I might be able to get them back if I turned you in. Spittleworth took them away. I escaped out of my bedroom window. That's why I'm in my pajamas." "I escaped from my window, too," said Bert. "But at least I had the sense to bring shoes. Come on, we'd better get out of here," he added, pulling Roderick to his feet. "We'll try to steal you some socks of a washing line on the way." But they'd taken barely a couple of steps when a man's voice spoke from behind them. boys raised their hands and turned around. A man with a dirty, mean face had just emerged from the shadows and was pointing a rifle at them. He wasn't in uniform, and neither Bert nor Roderick recognized him, but Daisy Dovetail could have told them exactly who this was. Basher John, Ma Grunter's deputy, now a full-grown man. Basher John took a few steps closer, squinting from one boy to the other. "Yeah," he said, "you two will do. Give me the sword," with the rifle pointed at his chest. Bert had no choice but to hand it over. However, he wasn't quite as scared as he might have been, because Bert, whatever Flapoon might have told him, was actually a very clever boy. This dirty-looking man didn't seem to realize he just caught a fugitive worth 100 gold ducats. He seemed to have been looking for any two boys, though. Why? Bert couldn't imagine. Roderick, on the other hand, had turned deathly pale. He knew Spittleworth had spies in every city and was convinced that they were both about to be handed over to the chief advisor, and that he, Roderick Roach, would be put to death for being in league with a traitor. "Move," said the blunt-faced man, gesturing them out of the alley with his rifle. With the gun at their backs, Bert and Roderick were forced away through the dark streets of Jeroboam until finally they reached the door of Ma Grunter's orphanage. Chapter 47. Down in the dungeons, down in the dungeons, down in the dungeons. Chapter 47. The kitchen workers in the palace were most surprised to hear that the Lord Spittleworth, that Miss Beamish had requested her own separate kitchen because she was so much more important than they were. Indeed, some of them were suspicious because Miss Beamish had never been stuck in all the years they've known her. However, as her cakes and pastries were still appearing regularly at the king's table, they knew she was alive wherever she was, and like many of their fellow countrymen, the servants decided it was safest not to ask questions. Meanwhile, life in the palace dungeons had been utterly transformed. A stove had been fitted in Miss Beamish's cell. Her prisoners in neighboring cells had been trained up to help her perform this different task that went into producing the featherlight pastries that made her the best baker in the kingdom. She demanded the doubling of the prisoners' rations to make sure that they were strong enough to whisk and fold, to measure and weigh, to sift and pour, and a rat catcher to clean the place of vermin, a servant to run between the cells, handing out different implements through the bars. The heat from the stoves dried out the damp walls. Delicious smell replaced the stench of mold and dank water. Miss Beamish insisted that each of the prisoners had to taste a finished cake so they understood the results of their efforts. Slowly, the dungeon started to be a place of activity, even of cheerfulness, and prisoners who had been weak and starving before Miss Beamish arrived were gradually fattening up. In this way, she kept busy and tried to distract herself from her worries about Bert. All the time, the rest of the prisoners baked. Mr. Dovetail sang the national anthem and kept carving a giant Ickabog feet in the cell next door. His singing and banging had enraged the other prisoners before Miss Beamish arrived, but now she encouraged everyone to join in with him. The sound of all the prisoners singing the national anthem drowned out the perpetual noises of his hammer and chisel, and the best of it was that when Spittleworth ran down into the dungeons to tell them to stop making such a racket, Miss Beamish set innocently that surely it was treason to stop people singing the national anthem. Spittleworth looked foolish at that, and all the prisoners bellowed with laughter. With a leap of joy, Miss Beamish thought she heard a weak, wheezy chuckle from the cell next door. Miss Beamish might not have known much about madness, but she knew how to rescue things that seemed spoiled like curdled sauce and falling souffles. She believed Mr. Dovetail's broken mind might yet be mended, if only he could be brought to understand that he wasn't alone and to remember who he was. And so every now and then Miss Beamish would suggest songs other than the national anthem, trying to jolt Mr. Dovetail's poor mind into the different course which might bring him back to himself. And at last, to her amazement and joy, she heard him joining in with the Ickabog drinking song, which had been popular even in the days long before people thought the monster was real. I drank a single bottle, and the Ickabog's a lie. I drank a bottle, another bottle, and I thought I heard it sigh. And now I've drunken another. I can't see slinking by. The Ickabog is coming, so let's drink before we die. Setting down the tray of cakes she'd just taken out of the stove, Miss Beamish jumped up onto her bed and spoke softly through the crack high in the wall. Daniel Dovetail, I heard you singing that silly song. It's Bertha. It's Bertha Beamish here, your old friend, remember me? We used to sing that a long time ago when the children were tiny. My Bert and your Daisy. Did you remember that, Dan? She waited for a response, and in a little while she thought she heard a sob. You might think it's strange, but Miss Beamish was glad to hear Mr. Dovetail cry, because tears can heal a mind as well as laughter. And that night, and for many nights afterwards, Mrs. Beamish talked softly to Mr. Dovetail through the crack in the wall, and after a while she began to talk back. Miss Beamish told Mr. Dovetail how terribly she regretted telling the kitchen maid that he'd said about the Ickabog, and Mr. Dovetail told her how wretched he had felt afterward for suggesting that Mr. Beamish had fallen off his horse, and each promised that the other that their child was alive, because they had to believe it or die. A freezing chill was now stealing into the dungeons through its one high, tiny barred window. The prisoners could tell a hard winter was approaching, yet the dungeon had become a place of hope and healing. Mrs. Beamish demanded more blankets for her helpers and kept her stove warm, burning all night, determined that they would survive. Well, we'll have to see what happens next. At least Miss Beamish is helping them out, so she's a blessing to be, as bad as it is to be in the dungeons. At least, she's giving the other prisoners hope and keeping them warm as well. Thank you so much for watching. Please don't forget to subscribe, give me a thumbs up, share, comment, follow me on Instagram, and I will be talking to you guys and seeing you in my next video.